Science education is the field concerned with sharing science content and process with individuals not traditionally considered part of the scientific community. The learners may be children, college students, or adults within the general public. The field of science education includes work in science content, science process, some social science, and some teaching pedagogy. The standards for science education provide expectations for the development of understanding for students through the entire course of their K-12 education and beyond. The traditional subjects included in the standards are physical, life, earth, space, and human sciences. Historical background. The first person credited with being employed as a science teacher in a British public school was William Sharp, who left the job at Rugby School in 1850 after establishing science to the curriculum. Sharp is said to have established a model for science to be taught throughout the British public schools. The next step came when the British Academy for the Advancement of Science published a report in 1867. Bars promoted teaching of pure science, and training of the scientific habit of mind. The progressive education movement of the time supported the ideology of mental training through the sciences. Bars emphasized separately pre-professional training in secondary science education. In this way, future Bars members could be prepared. The initial development of science teaching was slowed by the lack of qualified teachers. One key development was the founding of the first London School Board in 1870, which discussed the school curriculum. Another was the initiation of courses to supply the country with trained science teachers. In both cases, the influence of Thomas Henry Huxley was critical. John Tyndall was also influential in the teaching of physical science. In the U.S., science education was a scatter of subjects prior to its standardization in the 1890s. The development of a science curriculum in the U.S. emerged gradually after extended debate between two ideologies: citizen science and pre-professional training. As a result of a conference of 30 leading secondary and college educators in Florida, the National Education Association appointed a committee of 10 in 1892 which had authority to organize future meetings and appoint subject matter committees of the major subjects taught in U.S. secondary schools. The committee was composed of 10 educators and was chaired by Charles Eliot of Harvard University. The Committee of 10 met, and appointed 9 conferences committees. The 3 conference committees appointed for science were physics, astronomy, and chemistry, natural history, and geography. Each committee, appointed by the Committee of 10, was composed of 10 leading specialists from colleges and normal schools, and secondary schools. Each committee met in a different location in the U.S. The 3 science committees met for 3 days in the Chicago area. Committee reports were submitted to the Committee of 10, which met for 4 days in New York, to create a comprehensive report. In 1894, the published the results of work of these conference committees. According to the Committee of 10, the goal of high school was to prepare all students to do well in life, contributing to their well-being and the good of society. Another goal was to prepare some students to succeed in college. This committee supported the citizen science approach focused on mental training and withheld performance in science studies from consideration for college entrance. The Bars encouraged their longer-standing model in the UK. The US adopted a curriculum was characterized as follows. Elementary science should focus on simple natural phenomena by means of experiments carried out in the field. Secondary science should focus on laboratory work in the committees prepared lists of specific experiments. Teaching of facts and principles. College preparation. The format of shared mental training and pre-professional training consistently dominated the curriculum from its inception to now. However, the movement to incorporate a humanistic approach, such as science, technology, society and environment education, is growing and being implemented more broadly in the late 20th century. Reports by the American Academy for the Advancement of Science, including Project 2061, and by the National Committee on Science Education Standards and Assessment detail goals for science education that link classroom science to practical applications and societal implications. Pedagogy. Whilst the public image of science education may be one of simply learning facts by rote, science education in recent history also generally concentrates on the teaching of science concepts and addressing misconceptions that learners may hold regarding science concepts or other content. Science education has been strongly influenced by constructivist thinking. Constructivism in science education has been informed by an extensive research program into student thinking and learning in science, and in particular exploring how teachers can facilitate conceptual change towards canonical scientific thinking. Constructivism emphasizes the active role of the learner, and the significance of current knowledge and understanding in mediating learning, and the importance of teaching that provides an optimal level of guidance to learners. United States. In many U.S. states, K-12 educators must adhere to rigid standards or frameworks of what content is to be taught to which age groups. This often leads teachers to rush to cover the material without truly teaching it. In addition, the process of science, including such elements as the scientific method and critical thinking, is often overlooked. This emphasis can produce students who pass standardized tests without having developed complex problem-solving skills. Although at the college level American science education tends to be less regulated, it is actually more rigorous, with teachers and professors fitting more content into the same time period. In 1996, the U.S. National Academy of Sciences of the U.S. National Academies produced the National Science Education Standards, which is available online for free in multiple forms. Its focus on inquiry-based science, based on the theory of constructivism rather than on direct instruction of facts and methods, remains controversial. Some research suggests that it is more effective as a model for teaching science. The standards call for more than science as process, in which students learn such skills as observing, inferring, and experimenting. Inquiry is central to science learning. When engaging in inquiry, students describe objects and events, ask questions, construct explanations, test those explanations against current scientific knowledge, and communicate their ideas to others. They identify their assumptions, use critical and logical thinking, and consider alternative explanations. In this way, students actively develop their understanding of science by combining scientific knowledge with reasoning and thinking skills. Concern about science education and science standards has often been driven by worries that American students lag behind their peers in international rankings. One notable example was the wave of education reforms implemented after the Soviet Union launched its Sputnik satellite in 1957. The first and most prominent of these reforms was led by the Physical Science Study Committee at MIT. In recent years, business leaders such as Microsoft chairman Bill Gates have called for more emphasis on science education, saying the United States risks losing its economic edge. To this end, Tapping America's Potential is an organization aimed at getting more students to graduate with science, technology, engineering and mathematics degrees. Public opinion surveys, however, indicate most U.S. parents are complacent about science education and that their level of concern has actually declined in recent years. Professor Shreyasi Jumka Basu published extensively on the need for equity in science education in the United States. Furthermore, in the recent National Curriculum Survey conducted by ACT, researchers uncovered a possible disconnect among science educators. Both middle school, junior high school teachers and post-secondary science instructors rate process inquiry skills as more important than advanced science content topics. High school teachers rate them in exactly the opposite order, perhaps more communication among educators at the different grade levels is necessary to ensure common goals for students. 2012 Science Education Framework. According to a report from the National Academy of Sciences, the fields of science, technology, and education hold a paramount place in the modern world, but there are not enough workers in the United States entering the science, technology, engineering, and math professions. In 2012, the National Academy of Sciences Committee on a Conceptual Framework for New K-12 Science Education Standards developed a guiding framework to standardize K-12 science education with the goal of organizing science education systematically across the K-12 years. Titled A Framework for K-12 Science Education Practices, Cross-Cutting Concepts, and Core Ideas. The publication promotes standardizing K-12 science education in the United States. It emphasizes science educators to focus on the limited number of disciplinary core ideas and cross-cutting concepts. Be designed so that students continually build on and revise their knowledge and abilities over multiple years, and support the integration of such knowledge and abilities with the practices needed to engage in scientific inquiry and engineering design. The report says that in the 21st century, Americans need science education in order to engage in and systematically investigate issues related to their personal and community priorities, as well as to reason scientifically and know how to apply science knowledge. The committee that designed this new framework sees this imperative as a matter of educational equity to the diverse set of school children. Getting more diverse students into STEM education is a matter of social justice as seen by the committee. 2013 Next Generation Science Standards. In 2013, a new Standards for Science Education were released that update the national standards released in 1996. Developed by 26 state governments and national organizations of scientists and science teachers, the guidelines, called the Next Generation Science Standards, are intended to combat widespread scientific ignorance, to standardize teaching among states, and to raise the number of high school graduates who choose scientific and technical majors in college. Included are guidelines for teaching students about topics such as climate change and evolution. An emphasis is teaching the scientific process so that students have a better understanding of the methods of science and can critically evaluate scientific evidence. Organizations that contributed to developing the standards include the National Science Teachers Association, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the National Research Council, and Achieve, a non-profit organization that was also involved in developing math and English standards. Physics Education. Physics First, a program endorsed by the American Association of Physics Teachers, is a curriculum in which ninth-grade students take an introductory physics course. The purpose is to enrich students' understanding of physics, and allow for more detail to be taught in subsequent high school biology and chemistry classes. It also aims to increase the number of students who go on to take 12th grade physics or AP physics, which are generally elective courses in American high schools. Physics education in high schools in the United States has suffered the last 20 years because many states now only require 3 sciences, which can be satisfied by earth physical science, chemistry, and biology. The fact that many students do not take physics in high school makes it more difficult for those students to take scientific courses in college. At the university, college level, using appropriate technology-related projects to spark non-physics majors' interest in learning physics has been shown to be successful. This is a potential opportunity to forge the connection between physics and social benefit. Informal science education. Informal science education is the science teaching and learning that occurs outside of the formal school curriculum in places such as museums, the media, and community-based programs. The National Science Teachers Association has created a position statement on informal science education to define and encourage science learning in many contexts and throughout the lifespan. Research in informal science education is funded in the United States by the National Science Foundation. The Center for Advancement of Informal Science Education provides resources for the informal science education community. Examples of informal science education include science centers, science museums, and new digital learning environments, many of which are members of the Association of Science and Technology Centers. The Exploratorium in San Francisco and the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia are the oldest of this type of museum in the United States. Media include TV programs such as Nova, Newton's Apple, Bill Nye the Science Guide, Beakman's World, The Magic School Bus, and Dragonfly TV. Examples of community-based programs are 4-H youth development programs, hands-on science outreach, NASA and after-school programs, and Girls at the Center. Home education is encouraged through educational products such as the Former Things of Science subscription service. In 2010, the National Academies released Surrounded by Science, Learning Science in Informal Environments, based on the National Research Council study, Learning Science in Informal Environments, People, Places, and Pursuits. Surrounded by Science is a resource book that shows how current research on learning science across informal science settings can guide the thinking, the work, and the discussions among informal science practitioners. This book makes valuable research accessible to those working in informal science. Educators, museum professionals, university faculty, youth leaders, media specialists, publishers, broadcast journalists, and many others. United Kingdom. In England and Wales, schools science is a compulsory subject in the national curriculum. All pupils from 5 to 16 years of age must study science. It is generally taught as a single subject science until 6th form, then splits into subject-specific A-levels. However, the government has since expressed its desire that those pupils who achieve well at the age of 14 should be offered the opportunity to study the 3 separate sciences from September 2008. In Scotland, the subjects split into chemistry, physics and biology at the age of 13 to 15 for standard grades in these subjects. And there is also a combined science standard grade qualification which students can sit, provided their school offers it. In September 2006, a new science program of study known as 21st Century Science was introduced as a GCSE option in the UK schools, designed to give all 14 to 16-year-olds a worthwhile and inspiring experience of science. In November 2013, Ofsted's survey of science in schools revealed that practical science teaching was not considered important enough. Research. The practice of science education has been increasingly informed by research into science teaching and learning. Research in science education relies on a wide variety of methodologies, borrowed from many branches of science and engineering such as computer science, cognitive science, cognitive psychology and anthropology. Science education research aims to define or characterize what constitutes learning in science and how it is brought about. John D. Bransford, al. summarized massive research into student thinking as having 3 key findings. Preconceptions, prior ideas about how things work are remarkably tenacious, and an educator must explicitly address a student's specific misconceptions if the student is to reconfigure his misconception in favor of another explanation. Therefore, it is essential that educators know how to learn about student preconceptions and make this a regular part of their planning, knowledge organization. In order to become truly literate in an area of science, students must have a deep foundation of factual knowledge, understand facts and ideas in the context of a conceptual framework, and organize knowledge in ways that facilitate retrieval and application. Metacognition. Students will benefit from thinking about their thinking and their learning. They must be taught ways of evaluating their knowledge and what they don't know, evaluating their methods of thinking, and evaluating their conclusions. Educational technologies are being refined to meet the specific needs of science teachers. One research study examining how cell phones are being used in post-secondary science teaching settings showed that mobile technologies can increase student engagement and motivation in the science classroom. According to a bibliography on constructivist-oriented research on teaching and learning science in 2005, about 64% of studies documented are carried out in the domain of physics, 21% in the domain of biology, and 15% in chemistry. The major reason for this dominance of physics in the research on teaching and learning appears to be that physics learning includes difficulties due to the particular nature of physics. Research on students' conceptions has shown that most pre-instructional ideas that students bring to physics instruction are in stark contrast to the physics concepts and principles to be achieved from kindergarten to the tertiary level. Quite often students' ideas are incompatible with physics views. This also holds true for students' more general patterns of thinking and reasoning.